Alright everyone, it is time for the Occult, video number 367, Hominid Cryptids. I wanted to talk about specifically like Sasquatch, Yeti, the Bigfoot in general, the Skunk Ape actually from Florida, and also the orangutan, that's I believe Indonesia, Borneo roughly if I remember correctly, the island of Borneo. And I wanted to talk about my thoughts on hominid cryptids. So these are cryptids that generally are a loose cluster of different creatures. They're said to be pre-human hominids, human-like in intelligence in some cases, or ape-like in a general sense. And sometimes they get lumped together. Like you have a book and it'll cover all of these things under the broader heading of Bigfoot or Bigfoot-like creatures. I would like to parse them apart much as I do cryptids in general. So think of cryptozoology or Fortean zoology in general. You've got one term that encompasses a massive variety of different potential creatures that may or may not exist. Some of them eventually get proven to exist. The kangaroo was initially a cryptid in the early 19th century. When Europeans began to wander around Australia, as a British penal colony at first mainly, they reported that there was a large rabbitish-looking creature that carried its young in a pouch and bounced around on two legs and had a big long thick tail and could kick the shit out of you. And at the time, all of the aristocratic gentry over in Europe thought, well, you've been sampling the rum a little bit too much. They thought, this creature clearly does not exist. The platypus falls into the same category, so does the coelacanth. In time, you realize some of those creatures do actually exist. They may be exaggerated a little bit, like the rhinoceros doesn't look much like a unicorn, but it is real. The behemoth of the Bible actually is real. It just happens to be a biological entity. It's mortal. It doesn't have magical properties, although if you look at modern-day China, they still unfortunately believe that the ground-up horn will cure impotence. And that's really what I look at hominid cryptids as being. When we look at the general broader category of these different creatures, I'm going to look at them individually. So first we have, for instance, Bigfoot. I believe that it is plausible that there is some sort of creature or possibly even a group of humans out in the extremely vast, very underpopulated forests and mountain ranges of the Pacific Northwest. We're talking a significant proportion of all of British Columbia, a significant proportion of Oregon, of Washington State, parts of Idaho, even down into parts of California. The area is extremely vast. It is not particularly hospitable to human life. It's quite rugged. A small population of relatively reclusive creatures, or potentially humans, deformed humans maybe, could easily hide in those forests for an extended period of time. I do not believe in all sightings, to be clear. 90% of them are probably misidentifications, even if there is such a thing as Bigfoot. Some of them, in my opinion, may actually be real. And you won't really know that until you go in and cut down the entire forest or scope the entire area out. Some people have mentioned elaborate cave systems in the area. And it isn't really beyond the realm of possibility that a hominid species might predominantly be cave-dwelling and occasionally go out to forage. Pine cones and mushrooms and so forth are everywhere there, and particular human subspecies might be able to digest them enough in order to get their nutrients. I believe that the large number of sightings, though, does not translate to the phenomenon being more widespread than that. The initial tales and sightings are Pacific Northwest, the deep woods of that region. Again, very rugged, mountainous, a lot of caves, huge amount of potential biomass to be exploited, very ill explored, to the point where there are areas out there where if you get lost, you probably die. Maybe you get eaten by a Bigfoot. Maybe they scavenge your remains and use your bones as jewelry or something like that. But that doesn't mean that if a Bigfoot is sighted in the Adirondacks, that that's necessarily real. I noticed that a startling plurality of all tales of similar creatures in the Americas, in the North American continent, post-date the original tales that only take place in one particular location. So when you say Bigfoot, if you're talking about a Bigfoot sighting in British Columbia, I say it's possible. If you say Bigfoot was spotted on the edge of Rutland County, as literally happened about a decade ago, and it was a white Bigfoot, which means I think alcohol was involved more than anything else, I'm going to laugh at you. Because there's no There's no historical basis really other than the fact that Bigfoot became a phenomenon elsewhere to provide why a person would be claiming to see it. Ultimately, it was probably a bear, a prank, or it's just a goddamn hoax. Then you have the skunk ape. Now, this is in Florida, specifically, down near the Everglades, and I think the Cypress National Park area. And you have a famous photograph that may or may not be real. It is plausible that there's an orangutan running around down there, and if a person sees a big-ass male orangutan shuffling through the woods, it's good. If they can't identify it, and they probably can, it probably does look like Bigfoot. It's plausible. Could be a gorilla, could be a large chimp. Could also be a hoax, to be clear. It is possible that that's the case. We've found cobras down in the Everglades. There are giant boa constrictors and anacondas. There are troops of different monkeys wandering around that aren't native. There are a million different lizards and fish and mammals, literally anything that can survive in a reasonable climate. Anywhere between fully tropical and reasonably temperate. If it ends up in Florida, it starts breeding and becomes invasive. It's possible. It could be an escaped zoo animal. A lot of people brought exotic animals to the United States for many, many decades before they began cracking down. And somebody had a pet orangutan, and they said, "Oh, what a cute little baby chimp. Oh, it's okay. I'll dress him up in a tutu," and stuff like that. But then the baby orangutan hit 300 pounds and started getting irate as it, hit puberty and started getting hormonal. And they said, "Oh, shit. Well, my trailer here is not looking so good these days. I'm getting worried it's going to rip my knuckles out if I don't give it another banana, and I'm all out of banana funds for this month. Hey, Jimmy, have fun." And then they shove it out the door and they let it go wander off into the jungle. It's sort of like the idea of alligators in the sewer in New York City. There is no breeding population of gators down there. But there have been credible reports that occasionally they were there. They got flushed down the toilet by some rich person who had something. They thought it was cute at first, but then it bit their cat or something and they flushed it. This happens with fish, by the way. Goldfish end up in estuaries and shit because of this particular methodology as well. A little bit less due to modern sewer filtration, but it did happen back in the day. Prior to the Clean Water Act, maybe a bigger problem. So I think I would rate that as plausible. In fact, I would think the skunk ape is probably the most plausible of all these tales. Then you have the Yeti. I am very skeptical of the existence of the Abominable Snowman, as it's been termed more modernly. The idea of a large hominid creature living in such an area seems to be more of just an appeal to remoteness. Like, you can say anything exists in the deep ocean. You can say anything exists on the dark side of the moon because it can't readily be explored. And people's imaginations tend to run away with them. Now, if you're talking about an area, again, like the Pacific Northwest and Bigfoot sightings, you're talking about an area that, while relatively cold, is ultimately livable for a hominid species. If it were able to find shelter, it would be able to live there, it would be able to obtain food. Can you obtain much food in the Himalayan mountains? No, not unless you're carrying off a goat or something like that, and there have been attacks blamed on the Abominable Snowman. I would think that there are certain big cats, even Siberian tigers coming south potentially, bears potentially, and other creatures that really account for this. I'm skeptical that the Abominable Snowman exists. Of course, genetic testing has shown that all of the relics that are held sacred by some of the Buddhist monasteries there, like the famous Yeti skull cap, they're not actually from an unknown species. In some cases they're human, which is remarkable. In some cases they're from other species, but they can be quantified. Then you have the orangutan, and this is from Borneo. In my mind, these are orangutan sightings. Much like the skunk ape is likely an orangutan, and you don't really need an near-extinct hominid species to account for it. You can say it was an escaped zoo animal. Ultimately, I think people are seeing the old man of the forest, and it's not really a man, but it kind of looks human-esque, and it's just sort of a folkish mythology that happens to be there. You do have a lot of deep jungle in Borneo, but the thing is they've been steadily slashing and burning it and growing palm monoculture, killing a lot of orangutans, by the way, in the process, and they should be chastised severely for this. And we have never seen any human-like species in that area other than the orangutan, other than a known species. It perfectly fits with the descriptions of the orangutan. It perfectly fits with the descriptions of behavior, appearance, etc. We know it to be native to that particular location. So when we're talking about cryptids, be very careful. First, parse them apart according to subcategory. So it's not just cryptids, unknown creatures. There's a big difference between tales of Loch Ness and even tales of Champ in Lake Champlain, let alone if you compare them to Bigfoot or to the Chupacabra. You have to go in individually and regionally often and try to parse apart all these folk tales. People will be using folk tales about Bigfoot that come from some tribe 5,000 years ago in British Columbia and trying to extrapolate that that's evidence that some sighting that happened yesterday in Missouri has some sort of bearing to it. It's not related in any way. And so you have to sort of understand the backdrop of anthropology and folklore in order to begin understanding cryptozoology in any meaningful manner. So yes, I would say the skunk ape is more than just minorly plausible. Bigfoot is reasonably plausible. The orangutan is misidentification. The Yeti, in my opinion, does not exist whatsoever. That's about all. Peace out.